Inculturation is the term that they use. So in thinking about it, I was, this image came to mind. Okay, and then, anybody know what this is?
Grand Canyon.
The Grand Canyon. How many of you have ever been to the Grand Canyon? Wow, some of you have been there. Okay. Well, Richard, you've been there. What's your impression of the Grand Canyon when you've been there?
Well,
Breathtaking, right? I mean, it's enormous, isn't
it's
it?
enormous. You can't visualize it.
You almost can't even, you can't even see the whole thing. I think from one place it's hard to see the whole
I've
thing.
seen it from the air.
It's an amazing picture.
You
Right.
just stand in awe.
Right. And then of course, the one thing that came to my mind was imagining that you were the first person to see it. No, can you think about this? Think you're some Indian, walking the desert of Arizona and you're looking for food, or you're tracking buffalo or something like that, and you basically come through the woods, because it's not something you kind of see from the distance.
No.
You come through the woods and then it's like there. And I just imagine myself saying, wow, what is this, And if I wanted to get over there, I can't even get there, I mean, because it's enormous. So you have to walk through it, or you have to walk past it. So the one thing that came to mind about that, though, is this little part of the picture here. What is that? The river. What's the significance of the river? It made it. It made it. And so obviously the river, had wound in different paths, was bigger in different places in the past. But that's the river, okay? And it wasn't one, drop of the river. It was the whole river over time, right? It was a culmination of things over time. And that kind of speaks to me about our faith. That kind of speaks to me about our faith, because our faith is what we do in the culture, one thing at a time, over time. That's how I think about it. So, for me, we think about, I read the paper, I listen to the news like you do, and I see our culture the way that it is, and it's like, oh man, it's off track, and how is it ever going to get on track? And you know what? That's no different than the glass of water, a million years ago saying, how am I going to create a Grand Canyon? A glass of water by itself could not create the Grand Canyon, but trillions of glasses of water over millions of years could. So, your action, Ken, and your action, Frank, and yours, Sandy, and Thea, and Dave, Mike, and Donna, and Sister, and Richard, and Sandy,
Yes.
and Father, individually, over the time that we're here, with succeeding generations, will make a difference. But if none of us sees it that way, it won't.
You just addressed the point I was trying to make earlier.
Right.
Each decision we make in our lives, and dignity, affect someone around us,
Right,
as well as ourselves.
right,
And if we all live that way, what a beautiful world this is.
right, exactly. So the challenge to that is what? That the world tells us, well, you can't make a difference, right? Because you're just you. And then it also tells you that, well, hey, what you do in your personal life is your thing, but this is our public life, okay? So how many of us are even born as a child and raised with the idea that you have kind of like two persons of you? You've got the public person and the private person, right?
Yeah.
And, they're as different as the two sides of a piece of paper here. One side has writing on it, our faith life. A lot of times the other side has what?
The private side.
Nothing.
Blank.
The public side of your faith life is blank. So that's the challenge, And I think that's what this also speaks to, is you have to move beyond that. What's the next slide, Father? I forget. The next one. No, go to the next one, please. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
No.
The pictures. Yeah, the pictures in front of the words, yeah.
Change the color to black.
Inculturation.
Okay. So the term enculturation, which is used in the handout, is a term used in Christianity, especially in the Roman Catholic Church, referring to adaptation of the way church teachings are presented to non-Christian cultures and to the influence of those cultures on the evolution of such teachings. From Wikipedia, the new Webster's, right? What does all that mean? It basically means that we're trying to how do we interact with people who aren't like us, Christians, right? How do we interact with them? That's kind of what I think of it is. Another comment here: Gaudium and Spes, authentic and full humanity only through culture. So, what is culture? If I were to ask you for the definition of culture, what do you think it is? What in basic ingredients do you think it includes? Anybody?
This is right there.
I was going to say that.
Well, that's pretty close, but that's not the answer, sorry. It is that, so the things
The activities along the time.
What you
Well,
brought up.
I think of four things it talks about in the handout that you'll read. There we go. There they are, there's two of them, okay. An integrated system of beliefs, so values, what do we think is true? What's good, what's beautiful, what do we appreciate in life? What do we care about? For instance, our faith, our meaning of life, the fact that we respect, other people in society, we respect the unborn. Those are things that we value, right? Then we have customs. Customs, which is, well, how do we behave? How do we work with others? How do we, our customs could be going to, the way we celebrate Christmas, the way we celebrate any birthday or anniversary, or, even things like, we like to watch the Super Bowl, for some of us that's a custom, right? The activities that kind of define our lives, that's part of our customs too. Let's go to the next slide, I think there's two more there, right? Institutions. So we have a lot of institutions that we've created in society. If we were all just, living on a desert island together, we wouldn't have a lot of those institutions. We'd have some of those functions, but wouldn't have those institutions. But the ones that we have, that we live in, we all know, our government, laws, courts, churches, our family is an institution, because we set up rules and regulations of our family. That's probably the basic institution. Schools, hospitals, all these things here. And I think those are the four things. So those are the four ingredients of culture that define a culture. So when you think about our culture, the North American culture, you can think of things that are unique to us, right? Including our government, our education system, commerce that we have here, the things we like to do, the activities that we have, the holidays we celebrate, that's all part of our culture. If we stepped into China, that we were talking about before, some of us, that's a different culture, right? They have a different government, most likely a different faith, if any faith, all right? Certainly a different value system, different way of worship, different commerce. It's all completely different. Their culture is different than our culture. It doesn't make one right or wrong or better, it's just different, right? But the things I think that we're trying to do in our culture is we're trying to address the beliefs and values of our culture as it relates to each of us and what we like to see around us. I think that's what we're called to do. Can we go to the next slide? So when we talk about transforming culture, we really are talking about transforming people, right? Because it's people that make up the culture, not culture. It's like government isn't some esoteric body. It's what we've created, right? It's the things that we vote into office, it's the things we tell them to do or not do, all right? Culture is the same way. It's the result of who we are. So if you don't put anything into the culture, then it kind of becomes whatever other inputs make it, all right? You need to do your own part to affect the culture itself. So if you're going to, change the culture, you have to start off by, transforming people. And when you do that, there's a trickle effect, right? So right now we are reading a lot of us are in angst about same-sex marriage legislation in the state of Illinois. And someone's like, how do we come to this point, what's wrong with that politician? Well, that's a great question to ask, but that politician is only reflecting society, right? I mean, do you think for a minute that if all of his constituents were opposed to that he would be voting for it? No, because they're all preserving their jobs anyways. It'd be nice to think that they're out there trying to do the right thing, but for the most part, most of them are really trying to protect their own job. And they've done that by trying to figure out what it is that you, the voter, wants and cares about, and then giving it to you, right? That's really the reason why we have the situation we have these days. So when I see that legislation being presented, I'm not really saying to myself, oh wow, they're not trying to force an agenda down my throat. What they're really reflecting is the will of what they perceive the voters have. Now, the hard part for me is in the community that I'm in the sphere of people who I hang out with, I don't see that. I mean, I don't see any of you guys here saying that's an important thing that we should have in our state. And so I always wonder, who is it that they're representing but they must be there. They must be there because otherwise they wouldn't be voting this stuff, right? And you know what, that you could go even from there to other things like, a balanced budget. I mean, they're only giving people all the stuff that they want and not charging them, which is what their voters tell them they want, right? Voters aren't telling them we want responsibility, we're wanting to have our cake and eat it too, and so they're like, hey, fine, I'll give it to you, just put me back in office for another 2 years, okay?
But isn't that a small part of the culture, Mike? The small amount of people making all the noise that get the job.
But I'm arguing that it's not a small amount, Richard.
I don't think I agree with that. I think there's a
It's a
silent
small
majority.
percentage.
I think there's a silent majority that are afraid to open their mouth.
Yep.
Just like we are afraid to open our mouth and say what is right in the world.
Or there's
Okay.
a lot of people who see their side, don't agree with it.
But don't say anything.
Don't agree with it, but will allow it.
Yeah.
History is full of it.
That's right, so I would say those people, if you're not against it, you're for it.
That's what I'm saying.
And that's in effect what's happening.
If you're not against it, you're for it. That's the way I look at
They're
it.
saying, I wouldn't do it, but
But
if
have
they
the
all
right
want
to
to do it, then fine, let them do it.
Right. So I'm not arguing that there's the most of people want to do it. I would agree with you, there is a very vocal minority that want to do it. There is a silent minority that doesn't want to do it, and there's a bunch of people in the middle who don't care, or it's not the most important thing to them, or no one has explained it to them as to why it should be important to them. And
They just think that they can't make a difference.
or don't think they can make a difference, or they're just worried about, how am I going to get Johnny to a soccer practice, or how am I going to make the house payment next month, or anything like that, okay? So, I think that my point that I'm getting at is that to change things, you need to change people, okay? And it's almost like, I kind of think in these terms of the abortion debates, I would love to see that law, Roe versus Wade, overturned. I'd love to see that overturned. And maybe in my lifetime it will be. But you know what's going to happen? Until we find a way to change the hearts and souls of people, they will find a way to circumvent that law. And there will still be kids who die. There will be fewer, because there are some people who are not going to break the law, all right? But there's still going to be people who do it because they don't have fundamental respect for life. So to me, the battle gets waged at the individual level. It gets waged at the individual level. It's me talking to Frank. It's me talking to Dave, you know. That's where it gets hammered out, all right? And until we do that, we don't change hearts. And until we change hearts and people, we don't really change a culture. And there is a very vocal minority in a number of different areas that are very aggressive about changing hearts, changing souls, and changing minds and opinions, and they have an influence. It's time for us to do that ourselves, okay? The challenge is that up until Vatican II, and even to now, I think Father said, you know, when we were meeting the other day, you said things like Vatican, an ecumenical council take generations for it to kind of come into effect, right? And I think that's the same thing is true here. You know, it's kind of a far-reaching change that we're being asked to do. It takes us a while. It'd be theoretically nice to say I'm changing my life right now, but we all know that that's not possible to do. Okay, that it's a thing that occurs over time. So the point that I would make is that, you know, we need to start. We need to. Before Vatican II, it was like, okay, the spiritual stuff is over here, and this is your public life. You know, well, what Vatican II is saying through Gaudium and Spes is they need to come together. They need to come together. You can't have the duality anymore. They have to come together, and you need to use that coming together to transform the culture. So that all kind of starts with us, all right? So then the question becomes, all right, well, how do I do that? You know, I mean, I don't really feel comfortable engaging this stranger who I don't even know in some conversation about faith. I mean, I don't feel like I know enough about it. I'm not even sure how they would take it, you know, and plus I'm still dealing with the way I've been raised, which is keep it off to the side, and I'm still trying to embrace that myself. But I need to do it. How do I do it? So part of my talk here was, okay, well, how can you do it? You know, and I think that's what all of us are kind of called to think about is in our own life. Instead of running away from what we think is society, the things we don't like about society, we need to engage it in a way that makes sense to us, all right? So, you know, for years, I've tried to find ways to do that myself. I'm much better now at, you know, talking to people about issues of faith when they come up. Opportunities come, I can see it, it's there, and it's like, yeah, I can go with her, I can have this conversation. I've done this before, I feel confident about how it will work, I know what are some of the directions you can go, and so I'm gonna do that. But before I was there, I had to find other ways to do it. Before I felt comfortable doing that, I had to find other ways. So what were the other ways that I came up with? Well, I came up with a lot of passive ways to do it, which I thought were still effective and made me feel good about what I did. All right. So the first thing. Oh, go back. You're going.
Let me see.
Go back.
Yeah, that one. No, that one, yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I did was. And kind of where, for me, it started. I mean, it had been in place, but I would say that, you know, where it really kind of started to happen a lot was, you know, Sandy and I took the kids to Medjugorje in 2005, right? 2005, right? And so it was a pilgrimage, a life-changing pilgrimage, which I would encourage anybody to do. It's not a vacation, it's a pilgrimage, and some of you know what the difference between those two things are, all right? But while you're there, you experience certain things that you don't ever experience here. Like, you don't experience people fighting to get into church, okay? You don't experience people wanting to be there so much that they want to have a seat even if you don't have the seat, you know? I mean, does that ever happen here, other than confirmation and Easter or Christmas? This is everyday Mass, okay? That was everyday Mass.
That's on the hour.
On the hour. And another experience was you're walking to an area to see a religious site, or I don't know where we're going, but we're walking through a field, and as we're walking past this apartment complex, I'm listening to the radio, and they're broadcasting the Mass. Like, okay, this is not Sunday morning.